Today, we're going to dive into the incredible wisdom of the legendary business philosopher Jim Rohn. We're going to unpack his powerful method for mastering your time. And look, this is not just about making another to-do list. This is about a fundamental shift in how you see and use your entire day.
So let's just start with this simple but really profound question Rohn always asked. Are you running the day, or is the day running you? It is so easy to get caught up in just reacting to things, where the day's demands just pull you in a million different directions. The very first step to getting control back is just being honest about who's really in the driver's seat. And this just nails the core idea, doesn't it? So many of us are already working crazy hours, 10, 12, maybe even more. The answer isn't to magically find more hours. That's impossible. The real key, the real game changer, is to improve the quality and the focus of the hours you already have. So, where do we even begin with all this? Well, the first pillar of Ron's method is what he called the strategic foundation of everything, planning. Because let's be real, without a plan, you're not in control, you're just reacting. Rohn's foundation for planning is actually built on 3 super simple steps. First, you've got to have written goals, not just in your head, written down where they pull you forward. Second, you have to learn to think on paper. Get all those swirling thoughts out and give them some clarity. And then finally, you use that clarity to build a real, concrete game plan, a roadmap that guides what you do every single day.
Now, a massive part of that game plan is learning to separate the majors from the minors. Major tasks, these are the big ones, the high-impact activities that actually move you closer to your goals. Minor tasks, on the other hand, that's all the busy work. The stuff that makes you feel productive, like clearing out your inbox or tidying your desk, but doesn't actually create any significant results.
And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? Don't confuse movement with achievement. It's so easy to stay busy. It's easy to create a flurry of activity around you. But Ron's point is, you have to constantly ask yourself, what is keeping me busy? Is this just movement? Or is it real, honest-to-goodness, goal-oriented achievement? Okay, so once you've planned out what you need to work on, the second pillar is all about mastering how you work on it. And this is what Rohn called the art of concentration.
This might be one of Rowan's most famous pieces of advice, and for good reason. He used to tell a story about how he'd ruin his family time at the beach by thinking about problems at the office. And then he'd get back to the office and ruin his work time by thinking about being at the beach. Sound familiar? The whole discipline here is just to be fully present in whatever it is you're doing. It's this simple. When you work, work. Don't spend your morning mentally planning the golf game you have later because your focus is split. You're not really working. And then when you play, play. Don't let thoughts about some project creep in and ruin your downtime. By really compartmentalizing your attention, you become way more effective and honestly, a lot more fulfilled in both parts of your life. All right, so you've planned out your priorities, you're focused on the task at hand, but what about all the stuff that comes at you from the outside, all the demands and interruptions? This brings us to the third pillar, the defensive game of protecting your time. I absolutely love this quote. It's such a great way of saying you have to learn to say no. It is so incredibly easy to overload your schedule and get yourself into trouble just because you didn't have the strength in that moment to say, you know what, I can't do that. Saying no right up front is always easier than trying to wiggle out of a commitment you've already made. And a huge time waster, Rohn pointed out, was the telephone. And his advice is so practical. Before you even pick up the phone to call someone, have a little written agenda. It stops the conversation from just rambling on. And even more importantly, learn to let it ring. You do not have to answer just because it's making a noise, especially when you're in deep focus or, having dinner with your family. Now, Rohn shared this amazing story about one of his own weaknesses. He was a terrible courier, just awful at running simple errands. His staff would give him a check to deliver, and he'd find it in his coat pocket like 3 days later. He kept promising he'd do better, but he never did. And this led to a really brilliant insight. This whole thing led to what he called the bad courier principle. Instead of just fighting a weakness forever, his staff built a system to compensate for it. They just made a new rule. Never give Jim an errand. The lesson here is to be brutally honest with yourself. If you're terrible at bookkeeping, don't just promise you'll get better. Hire someone or find an app. Compensate for your weaknesses instead of just procrastinating on them forever. So when you put all of these pieces together, you start to see that mastering your time isn't some magic trick. It's not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process. It's a set of disciplines that you have to practice every single day. So let's just quickly recap the core ideas here, the 3 pillars. First, you have to plan, and that means really separating those high-impact activities from all the busy work. Second, you have to concentrate, giving your full, undivided attention to whatever is in front of you. And third, you have to protect your time by learning to say no and building systems that work with your nature, not against it.
Mastering your time really starts with one single step. So, looking at these principles we just talked about, from planning on paper to being a bad courier, what is the very first discipline you're going to put into practice, starting right now?